My name is Alara Vance. For 28 years, I have lived my life as a quiet study in blues and grays, the colors of a pre-dawn sky over the water. I've always believed that if you moved through the world with enough grace and diligence, if your work was impeccable and your heart was kind, you would eventually find your place in the sun. I was an architect, and my life, much like my blueprints, was built on the principles of order, balance, and quiet integrity. I lived in Port Blossom, a city carved from rain-soaked forests and nestled against the cold, deep waters of the Salish Sea. It was a city that understood my soul, a place where glass towers reflected the moody sky, and the persistent drizzle felt more like a gentle cleansing than an inconvenience. The day my meticulously designed life shattered began not with a storm, but with a whisper. "Miss Vance, I need you to gather your personal effects now." The voice belonged to Marcus, one of the building's security guards, a man with whom I'd exchanged pleasantries about the weather nearly every morning for 5 years. Today, his voice was stripped of its usual warmth, replaced by a practiced, gentle firmness that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. He stood beside my drafting table, his presence a dark, unmovable object in my sunlit corner of the Sterling and Finch offices. Around me, the familiar hum of the studio seemed to warp and fade. 20 of my colleagues, people I'd collaborated with, celebrated birthdays with, and shared late-night takeout with, suddenly became masters of feigned concentration. Keyboards clicked with a little too much purpose. Heads were bent over sketches with an unnatural intensity. This wasn't a performance review or a disciplinary meeting. This was an amputation. A sterile, brown cardboard box appeared on my desk as if summoned by a dark magic. Helen from Human Resources materialized beside it, her face arranged in an expression of deep, corporate-mandated sympathy. It was the same look she wore when announcing insufficient cost of living adjustments. "Please, take all the time you need, Alara," she said, but the rhythmic tap of her patent leather pump against the polished concrete floor told a different story. The digital clock on my monitor glowed, 10:17 a.m. I had been employed for precisely 2 hours and 17 minutes of my Tuesday. My hands, which could coax elegant lines from a pencil and turn complex spatial problems into harmonious designs, felt clumsy and foreign. They trembled as I reached for my things. First, the heavy ceramic mug, a gift from a former mentor, its glaze the color of a stormy sea. Then, the small, thriving pilea plant I'd rescued from the discount rack at the local nursery. Its round, coin-like leaves had unfurled under the steady northern light of my window, a small, green testament to patience and care. My professional architecture license, framed in simple black wood, went in next. Alara Vance, AIA. I had cried the day it arrived in the mail. The hardest part was the photograph. It was of my mother and me, taken on the day I graduated from the University of Washington with my Master of Architecture. We were standing on the lawn, the spring cherry blossoms exploding in a riot of pink behind us, both of us grinning with a shared, unbridled joy. We had conquered the world that day. She died of a sudden aneurysm 2 years later, before I landed this dream job, before Alistair Sterling himself had shaken my hand on my first day and said, with a warmth that felt like a benediction, "We need your eye, Miss Vance. We need your quiet strength." Marcus's throat clearing brought me back to the present. I had been staring at the photo, lost in the memory of my mother's hand in mine. The pretense of work in the studio had evaporated. Now, they were all just watching. Anika from the landscape department had her hand clasped over her mouth. Then, the junior designer I'd spent weeks mentoring stared at his screen, his shoulders hunched in what looked like shame. I couldn't blame them for their shock. I was the reliable one. Alara Vance, who caught the calculation error that would have cost the firm millions on the museum project. Alara, who stayed until midnight to perfect the presentation boards for the waterfront development. Alara, who organized the holiday gift drive and remembered everyone's coffee order. I had never missed a deadline, never submitted a drawing that wasn't perfect, never given them a single reason to doubt my dedication. But that was the story of my life, wasn't it? Perfection had never been a shield. Growing up, I was the daughter who orbited my brother's chaotic son. While Leo was setting off firecrackers in the neighbor's garden or talking his way out of a failing grade, I was quietly winning scholastic awards and volunteering at the city library. My report cards were a string of flawless A's, my projects displayed with pride at school open houses. Leo's existence was a series of near misses and dramatic recoveries, each one celebrated by our father as a sign of his resilience. The first significant crack in my carefully constructed world appeared during my senior year of high school. Leo, a year older, had been caught paying another student to write his final history paper at his private academy. The consequence wasn't suspension or expulsion, but a brand new convertible, a graduation gift from our father. The boy's been under a lot of pressure, Dad had explained, his voice brooking no argument when I dared to question the logic. He needs to know we're in his corner. Meanwhile, my full scholarship to a prestigious architecture program earned me a distracted, "That's wonderful, sweetie." My achievements were quiet, expected things, like the turning of the tides. Leo's were loud, unpredictable, and always, for some reason, more worthy of attention and reward. Sterling and Finch had been my sanctuary from that dynamic. Here, meritocracy felt real. When I solved the structural conundrum of the cantilevered theater balcony that had stumped the senior partners, Mr. Sterling had personally delivered a bottle of vintage champagne to my desk. When my sustainable design for the new city library won a regional award, my name was on the plaque, and my bonus reflected the firm's gratitude. For 5 years, I had poured my soul into the concrete and glass of my designs, working 60-hour weeks not out of obligation, but out of a deep, abiding love for the work and the sense of belonging it gave me. I had found my place. I never spoke of these successes at the obligatory Sunday dinners at my father's waterfront estate. I had learned early on that my victories were perceived as implicit criticisms of Leo's meandering path. When I mentioned the library award, Leo had scoffed. "Guess it helps when your boss has a soft spot for you." Dad had just chuckled and asked Leo about his latest entrepreneurial venture, a vague plan to import artisanal dog toys. They had a way of turning my gold into lead, of making my proudest moments feel like small, selfish indulgences. The bitter irony of it all settled in my chest as I sat in my car in the hushed quiet of the underground parking garage. The cardboard box sat on the passenger seat, a flimsy coffin for a life I had built with my own 2 hands. The job that had given me a sense of worth, the one place where I felt truly seen, was gone. And I hadn't even been given the dignity of a reason, just a bland form letter about corporate restructuring and a security escort to ensure I didn't pocket any staplers. My phone buzzed. A text from my father, Richard Vance. "How was your day, Alara?" The formality was typical. I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the screen. I typed back a simple, stark truth: I was just fired. His reply came a minute later. "A pity. We'll discuss it at dinner on Sunday." Not what happened. Or "Are you all right?" Or "How can I help?" Just an appointment. A slot in his busy schedule to address my professional ruin. Then came the text from Leo. No words. Just a gif of a cartoon character slipping on a banana peel and falling flat on its face, followed by a string of laughing crying emojis. He had managed to distill my career's collapse into a punchline before I had even managed to take my first, shuddering breath of unemployment. I sat in that garage for a long, silent hour, watching the rhythmic sweep of headlights as people left the building I no longer belonged to. The architect in me, the part that craved logic and order, knew I needed a plan. Update my portfolio, call my contacts, start the methodical process of finding a new position. But another part of me, a deeper, quieter part that had been carefully cataloging a lifetime of small cuts and grand dismissals, was beginning to stir. This wasn't just about a job. This was about the fundamental premise of my life being a lie. And for the first time, my instinct wasn't to retreat into my quiet world of blues and grays and try harder. It was to find out exactly why I had been so easily erased. 2 weeks bled into one another, a watercolor wash of sleepless nights and listless days. My apartment, once a sanctuary of minimalist calm, had become a fortress of despair. Empty teacups gathered on my kitchen counter like a silent vigil. My laptop, usually humming with design software, sat closed on the dining table, a sleek black tombstone. My routine had devolved into a bleak cycle: wake, stare at the ceiling, scroll through job postings with a hollow feeling in my chest, order pho from the place down the street, and repeat. The vibrant energy of Port Blossom, with its bustling Pike Place market and the distant horns of ferries, felt like a world away, a life belonging to someone else. Then the invitation arrived, slid under my door with a crisp, insidious whisper. The paper was a heavy, creamy cardstock with beveled, silver-leafed edges, the kind my father insisted upon for occasions he deemed significant. My name was inscribed across the envelope in a flowing, impersonal calligraphy: Ms. Alara Vance. Not my dearest daughter, or even just Alara. Ms. Vance. As if I were a business associate being summoned out of duty. With a numb sort of dread, I tore it open. The engraved text announced, "Richard Vance cordially invites you to celebrate the appointment of his son, Leo Vance, to the position of Executive Vice President at Crestwood Holdings." The event was this coming Saturday at the St. Clair Yacht Club, a place of old money and even older prejudices. The dress code was, of course, cocktail attire. There was no mention of my own recent, brutal career change. No acknowledgement of the chasm that had opened in my life. Just a gilded summons to applaud the golden boy's latest triumph. I let the invitation fall onto my coffee table, where it lay like a pristine, unexploded bomb. Executive Vice President. Leo, whose college transcripts were a monument to gentlemen's C's and last-minute saves, had somehow ascended to a role that should have taken a decade of dedicated work to achieve. The same Leo who thought fiscal responsibility was a brand of expensive whiskey was now, apparently, a captain of industry, while I was calculating whether I could make my savings last through the winter. The ringing of my phone at precisely 6:30 p.m. startled me. The number was blocked, but an intuition I couldn't explain compelled me to answer. "Alara? It's Alistair Sterling." His voice was different from how I remembered it, lower, strained, as if he were speaking from a great distance. "Mr. Sterling," I began, my own voice raspy from disuse. "I don't think there's anything left to say." "Please," he interrupted, a note of urgency cutting through the static. "We must speak. In person. Tonight. There are things you need to understand about your termination. Things concerning your brother." The coffee shop he chose was a small, independent place in Fremont, far from the downtown core where architects and developers congregated. It was dimly lit and smelled of roasted beans and rain-dampened wool. Alistair Sterling was already there, tucked into a shadowy corner booth, looking 10 years older than he had 2 weeks ago. The usual crispness of his bespoke suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled weariness. "Thank you for coming, Alara," he said, gesturing to the seat opposite him. His hands, usually so steady and expressive when describing a design, were clasped tightly on the table. "I was afraid you wouldn't." "What is this about, Mr. Sterling? If this is some kind of apology tour for firing your most dedicated architect without cause, you can save your breath." "I didn't fire you, Alara," he said, his voice flat and heavy with defeat. "I was coerced." A hot flush crept up my neck. "Coerced? By whom?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. The screen showed a photograph, grainy and poorly lit, but clear enough. It was a younger Alistair, at what looked like a boisterous off-site company retreat from years ago. His arm was slung around a young woman, an intern at the time, and they were both laughing, holding champagne flutes. It was an innocent picture, the kind taken 100 times at corporate events. "This was taken 15 years ago," he said quietly. "A celebration after we won the Symphony Hall contract. The young woman was our summer intern. A brilliant student. Nothing untoward ever happened between us, but your brother is very creative with narratives." I stared at the photo, the pieces beginning to click into place with a sickening thud. "Leo. He used this to threaten you." Alistair's voice dropped to a near whisper. "He came to my office 3 weeks ago. He had this photo, along with a fabricated, anonymous complaint he'd drafted himself, alleging a pattern of impropriety. He said he would leak it to the press, send it to the ethics board, to my wife, unless I streamlined the department." The air in the coffee shop felt thick and suffocating. "Streamline the department? You mean, fire me?" Alistair finally met my gaze, and his eyes were full of a weary shame. He was specific. "He said you were becoming too ambitious, that you were developing a profile in the city that might overshadow his own. He was preparing to make his move at Crestwood Holdings and said that having his overachieving sister as a rising star in the same industry would create an untenable family dynamic. He wanted you neutralized before you could become a problem for him." My hands were shaking. I wrapped them around my cold teacup to still them. A problem for him? He doesn't even work in architecture. He's been networking with developers, financiers. Crestwood has a major real estate division. He told me he couldn't have you in a position to compete for the same projects or, God forbid, to one day be in a position to judge his work. It was preemptive. The full, monstrous scope of it washed over me. Leo hadn't just stumbled into good fortune. He had actively, maliciously, and methodically destroyed my career to clear a path for his own. He hadn't just benefited from my failure, he had engineered it. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Alistair leaned forward, a spark of the old fire returning to his eyes. "Because he made a mistake. The intern in that photo? Her name is Dr. Eris Thorne. She's now a tenured professor of engineering at MIT. I called her. She was appalled. She remembered the retreat, remembered the photo, and was more than willing to provide a sworn affidavit about the timeline and the context. Your brother didn't just blackmail me, he committed slander against her as well. The foundation of his threat is sand. He pulled his phone back. The question is, Alara, what do you wish to do with this information? I thought of the ostentatious invitation on my coffee table. I thought of Leo's mocking gif. I thought of my father's clinical dismissal of my pain. I thought of 28 years of being the quiet, dependable foundation upon which my brother's rickety ego was built. I want my job back, I said, the words feeling solid and real in my mouth. It's yours. You can start Monday. Alistair paused, studying my face. But I have a feeling that's no longer enough. He was right. Something new was crystallizing in the hollow space in my chest. Not a desire for petty revenge, but a craving for a profound and public correction of the record. For justice. Leo had always operated as if he were immune to consequences, shielded by our father's wealth and his own superficial charm. He had counted on me to be the good daughter, to absorb the blow and retreat in quiet dignity. He had fundamentally misjudged who I was. The promotion party, I said, my voice gaining strength. Will you be there? Alistair's eyebrows rose. Your father invited our entire senior partnership. It's a networking power play, thinly disguised as a family affair. Perfect, I said. A room full of the very people Leo sought to impress. The pillars of the community whose respect he was leveraging to build a career on a foundation of lies. The career he had tried to purchase with the currency of my own. I stood up, the lethargy of the past 2 weeks sloughing off me like a heavy coat. Mr. Sterling, I'll see you on Saturday night. Alara, what are you planning? A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I'm planning on presenting a revised design, I said. One that accurately reflects the structural integrity of the Vance family. When I returned to my apartment, I picked up the silver-edged invitation and dialed the RSVP number. It went to my father's personal assistant. Eleanor, this is Alara Vance, I said, my voice clear and steady. I'll be attending the celebration for Leo. Please mark me down for one. Oh, how wonderful, Alara. Your father will be so pleased. Do you have any dietary restrictions? Just one, I said, catching my reflection in the dark glass of the window, a woman I was only just beginning to recognize. I no longer swallow lies. An hour later, a text from my father appeared. So glad you're coming, sweetie. Try to wear something cheerful. It's a celebration, after all. I typed my reply, each letter a small act of rebellion. Don't worry, Dad. I'll wear something entirely appropriate for the occasion. For the first time since Marcus the security guard had appeared at my desk, I felt a sense of purpose. I felt like an architect again, about to unveil the most important design of my life. Monday morning arrived with the strange, disorienting sensation of walking back into a life I thought I'd lost. The glass doors of the Sterling and Finch building slid open with a familiar hiss, but this time, I wasn't Alara Vance, senior architect. I was a ghost, a secret. Alistair had arranged for my new base of operations to be in the firm's archives, a climate-controlled room in the sub-basement, filled with the ghosts of projects past, rolled-up blueprints, dusty models, and rows upon rows of bankers' boxes. Officially, you're a freelance consultant retained to digitize our historical project records, Alistair explained, handing me a plain white key card with no photo and no name. Unofficially, you have access to our servers, our financial software, our entire digital footprint. No one will question your presence down here. The setup was perfect. I was invisible again, but this time, it was a position of power. No one looks twice at the contractor in jeans and a sweater, quietly humming to herself while sifting through old files. I became a phantom in the machine. I began with Crestwood Holdings public filings. The company where Leo had so miraculously landed was a sprawling entity with interests in finance, real estate, and logistics. The numbers were opaque, designed to be. But after 3 days of immersing myself in a world of SEC filings, shareholder reports, and a pot of perpetually reheating coffee, I started to see the faint outlines of a narrative. The first thread I pulled was a small one, a series of quarterly payments for strategic consulting made to a company called Apex Strategic Consulting, LLC. A quick search revealed Apex had no website, no physical address beyond a mailbox in a strip mall, and no digital presence whatsoever. It was a corporate ghost. I dug deeper, using a research tool Alistair had given me access to, and traced the LLC's registration. It led to a holding company, which was owned by another, and finally, at the end of the chain, to an account controlled by none other than my father, Richard Vance. Over the last year, Crestwood Holdings had paid this phantom firm over $85,000 for market analysis and due diligence services that were never rendered. It was the price of Leo's entry. This wasn't just nepotism, it was a carefully laundered bribe. My hands were steady as I photographed every transaction, every digital signature. My new office became the corner booth of a small cafe across the street from the Crestwood Holdings headquarters. I'd sit for hours, nursing a single latte, my laptop angled away from the window. I learned the rhythms of the building. I saw the executives come and go, their suits sharp, their faces set with purpose. And I saw Leo. He would stride out of the building around 2 p.m. most afternoons for what his calendar, which I'd gained access to through a forgotten shared network drive, called client outreach. I followed him one afternoon, feeling a ridiculous cocktail of adrenaline and shame. His client outreach was a private lesson at an exclusive indoor golf simulator downtown. I called the facility later, pretending to be his assistant confirming his schedule. "Oh, Mr. Vance's standing appointment," the cheerful receptionist said. "Yes, every Tuesday and Thursday at 2. He's been a regular for 6 months. We bill it directly to his corporate account at Crestwood. Embezzlement, plain and simple." But the golf lessons were small potatoes. The real rot was in the expense reports for a leadership retreat in Whistler. Leo had expensed over $15,000 for a week-long executive seminar. I called the resort he'd stayed at. There had been no seminar. I called the company that supposedly hosted it. They hadn't held an event in Whistler in over 5 years. The itemized receipts from the hotel, which I found buried in Crestwood's accounting software, told the real story. Spa packages for 2, private ski instructors, and dinner reservations at restaurants where the tasting menu cost more than my monthly rent. He wasn't building business relationships. He was funding a lavish holiday on the company's dime, and the receipts indicated he hadn't been alone. Each discovery was a cold, hard brick of evidence. But I needed more than financial misdeeds. I needed to understand the conspiracy, to see the full architecture of their deception. That's when I met Clara. She worked the evening custodial shift at Sterling and Finch, a woman in her 60s with kind, tired eyes and an air of quiet omnipresence. I was working late in the archives, surrounded by blueprints, when she pushed her cart into the room. "You're the one they fired," she said, her voice soft but direct. She didn't seem surprised to see me there. "I'm a contractor now," I said, the life feeling thin even to my own ears. Clara let out a soft, knowing chuckle. "Honey, I've been cleaning buildings like this for 40 years. I know the difference between someone who's hired and someone who's hiding." She paused, her gaze resting on the pile of documents spread across my table. "Question is, what are you looking for down here in the land of the forgotten?" Something in her frank, unassuming manner disarmed me. I decided to trust her. "I'm trying to find out why my brother decided my career was a threat to his." Her expression sharpened with recognition. "The slick one in the $1,000 suit? The one who was in Mr. Sterling's office a few weeks back, making threats like he owned the place." My heart hammered against my ribs. "You saw him?" "Saw him, heard him through the door, and cleaned up the coffee he spilled when Mr. Sterling didn't fold fast enough." Clara wiped down a nearby shelf with a slow, deliberate motion. "Men like that, they think people like me are invisible. They say things they shouldn't. And they're careless." She reached into a pocket of her work vest and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, wrinkled and stained with what looked like coffee. "He threw these in the recycling bin in the conference room after his little meeting. Figured they might be important." I unfolded the papers with trembling hands. They were printed emails. A chain between Leo and a man named Marcus Thorne, a senior VP at Crestwood. The emails were chillingly direct. They weren't just about blackmailing Alistair. They were a strategic plan to systematically discredit me within the Port Blossom architectural community. They listed 3 other prominent firms I might approach for a job and outlined a series of anonymous tips to be dropped with their HR departments, questioning my temperament and professional stability. It was a scorched earth campaign. "Your brother's not as smart as he thinks he is," Clara observed, watching my face. "Leaving a trail like that." "Clara, why are you helping me?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Her expression softened, but her eyes held a fire I hadn't seen before. "Because 35 years ago, I was a bookkeeper with a head for numbers better than any man in my office. But I was also a single mother with 2 kids, and when it came time for a promotion, they gave it to the boss's nephew. Men like your father and your brother have been building their worlds on the backs of women like us for a long time. It's about time someone started checking the foundations." Clara became my silent, indispensable partner. She knew the building's secrets, the conversations people thought were private, the documents left carelessly on desks. She brought me snippets of information, a schedule left on a whiteboard, a name overheard in a hallway. But the most valuable thing she gave me was a sense of solidarity. "You're not just fighting for a job, Alara," she said one evening, as we sat together in the quiet archives, organizing the evidence into a damning portfolio. "You're fighting for every person who was ever told to be quiet, to be patient, to wait their turn while someone less deserving stepped over them. Don't just win. Remodel the whole damn building." The party was now less than a week away. I had a meticulously organized binder filled with proof, a list of witnesses I could call upon, and a plan that would not only expose Leo, but the entire rotten structure that supported him. I also had something I hadn't possessed in a very long time, the unshakable conviction that I was not the one who was broken. Saturday night arrived on a soft breeze, carrying the scent of salt and late-blooming roses. The St. Clair Yacht Club was a monument to old Port Blossom wealth, a sprawling white building perched on the edge of the marina, its wide verandas overlooking a fleet of silent, gleaming boats. I pulled my modest sedan into the circular drive at exactly 7:20 p.m., 10 minutes before the official start time, a habit ingrained from years of professional punctuality. The valet, a young man whose face I recognized from previous family events, did a subtle double-take. Word traveled on the well-heeled grapevine. I was the Vance daughter who'd been unceremoniously fired, the quiet one who had stumbled. My presence here was an anomaly. I had chosen my dress with the precision of an architect selecting a load-bearing beam. It was a deep sapphire blue silk, elegant and severe. It was expensive enough to signal that I was not destitute, but conservative enough to offer no purchase for my father's criticisms. I wore my mother's pearl earrings, small and luminous, and carried a slim leather portfolio that felt less like an accessory and more like a shield. The main ballroom was already humming, a symphony of clinking glasses and confident laughter. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, forgiving light on the assembled guests, men in tailored suits and women in shimmering cocktail dresses. I spotted the senior partners from Crestwood Holdings, city council members, real estate developers, the entire ecosystem of power in which my father and brother swam. Leo was holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his face already flushed with champagne and adoration. His laugh, a loud, braying sound, cut through the din. He was performing the role of the charming, successful scion to perfection, and the crowd was eating it up. "Alara, I wasn't sure you'd have the nerve to show your face." My father appeared at my elbow, a flute of champagne in his hand and his signature smirk firmly in place. It was the same look of amused condescension he'd given me when, as a child, I'd tried to explain the rules of a game he had no interest in learning. "Hello, father," I said, my voice even. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. "It's a lovely party." "Of course it is. We're celebrating your brother. He has a natural gift for leadership, you know. Some people have it, some don't." The implicit comparison was as sharp and deliberate as a surgeon's scalpel. He gestured vaguely at the crowd. "Leo understands how this world works. It's about relationships, not just paperwork." I sipped my water, my eyes scanning the room. I saw Alistair Sterling near the entrance, speaking with another architect. He gave me a brief, almost imperceptible nod. A few of my former colleagues from Sterling and Finch were scattered through the room, looking profoundly uncomfortable. They would pointedly look away whenever my gaze swept in their direction. "You always did prefer your books to people," a voice said from behind me. I turned to find Eleanor Crestwood, the matriarch of the family whose name was on the building across the street. She was in her late 60s, with a sweep of silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Crestwood," I murmured, surprised. "Eleanor, please," she said, her eyes appraising my dress, my portfolio, my composure. "I've been watching you, dear. You hold yourself differently tonight. There's a stillness about you." She knew. In the way that women who have spent a lifetime navigating the treacherous currents of powerful men's egos often do, she knew something was amiss. Before I could respond, a sharp feedback squeal from the microphone drew everyone's attention. Leo had taken the small, elevated stage at the front of the room, swaying slightly. "Friends, family, colleagues," he began, his voice booming with manufactured bonhomie. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this milestone with me. It just goes to show that with a little grit and a lot of hard work, you can achieve anything you set your mind to." A wave of nausea washed over me at the sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy. My father was beaming, his chest puffed out like a proud pigeon. The Crestwood executives were nodding, their smiles placid and approving. They were all celebrating a lie. "I'd like to propose a toast," Leo continued, raising his glass. His eyes found mine across the room, and a cruel, triumphant smirk spread across his face. "To family. The ones who support you, no matter what." He paused for dramatic effect. "And to my sister, Alara. I hear the job market is tough. Maybe she should try something with less responsibility. At least then she can't get fired." The laughter that followed was a physical blow. It wasn't just polite chuckles, it was the hearty, unrestrained laughter of men who felt secure in their power, amused by the public humiliation of a woman who had dared to compete in their world. My father clinked his glass with the man next to him, his grin wide and unashamed. I stood perfectly still, my expression unreadable, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. I did not look away. I did not flinch. I simply looked toward the grand ballroom doors and waited. At precisely 8:15 p.m., the doors swung open. Alistair Sterling entered, alone. A hush fell over the room as he walked forward. He wasn't just a successful architect. He was a man of unimpeachable integrity, and his presence carried a weight that my father's money could never buy. He didn't stop to greet anyone. He walked with a calm, deliberate purpose directly toward the stage, a simple manila folder in his hand. Leo was still basking in the afterglow of his joke when Alistair stepped onto the stage beside him. "Leo," Alistair said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Before we toast to your success, there are a few matters of business to discuss." The air crackled with tension. I saw Leo's face pale as his eyes fell on the folder in Alistair's hand. He knew. "You blackmailed me, Leo," Alistair stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "You used a doctored photograph and a fabricated complaint to coerce me into firing your sister, a woman whose talent and integrity far surpass your own." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. My father's champagne flute froze halfway to his lips. The Crestwood partners exchanged panicked looks. Then, Alistair turned and looked directly at me. "Alara," he said, his voice resonating with a deep, clear respect that I had craved my entire life. He extended the folder. "I believe these are your findings." Every head in the room swiveled to face me. Time seemed to slow as I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the polished wood floor. The portfolio felt light in my hands. I took the folder from Alistair, my eyes locked on Leo's. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed terror of a man whose foundations were crumbling beneath him. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "This is an invoice," I said, my voice amplified by the room's sudden, perfect silence. "From a company called Apex Strategic Consulting for $85,000. Billed to Crestwood Holdings for market analysis." I looked directly at my father. Apex, as it turns out, is a shell company registered to a holding firm owned by Richard Vance. "This isn't a consulting fee. It's the price you paid for your son's job." The murmurs started, low and dangerous. "And this," I continued, pulling out another document, "is an expense report for a $15,000 leadership retreat in Whistler. A retreat that, according to the organizers, never happened." I held up the hotel receipt. It did, however, pay for a week of private ski lessons, spa treatments for two, and a great deal of very expensive wine. This is slander," Leo stammered, reaching for the microphone. "I'm not finished," I said, my voice cutting him off. I held up the final document, the printed email chain. "And this is a conversation between Leo Vance and Marcus Thorne of Crestwood Holdings, outlining their plan to systematically destroy my professional reputation to ensure I wouldn't be a competitor for future projects. They call it managing a potential conflict. I call it conspiracy." Marcus Thorne, a silver-haired man at a front table, looked as though he might be sick. His wife, Eleanor, was staring at him with an expression of glacial fury. "She's having a breakdown," my father finally spluttered, finding his voice. "She's been unstable since she lost her job." "Richard," Alistair's voice was like ice. "Your son's employment at Crestwood Holdings is terminated, effective immediately. And as of an emergency vote held by the board this afternoon, so is your chairmanship." My father's champagne glass slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound echoing the shattering of his world. "The motion to remove you passed by a single, deciding vote," Alistair announced. "It was cast by the board's newest member, appointed this morning in recognition of her exceptional design expertise, her financial acumen, and her unwavering ethical compass." Every eye in the room landed on me. A profound, quiet calm settled over me. It felt like coming home. "You," my father whispered, his face a mask of disbelief. I looked at the man who had been my father, the architect of so much of my quiet pain. "You taught me that the world is built on power and connections, Dad," I said, my voice soft but clear. "You just never taught me how to lose. So I learned how to win instead." Two discreet security guards appeared at the edge of the stage. As they led a sputtering Leo and a stunned, silent Richard Vance from the room, something incredible happened. Eleanor Crestwood began to clap. Not polite, obligatory applause, but a slow, deliberate, resonant clap. Then her husband joined in. Then another woman at a nearby table. And then another. Within seconds, the room was filled with a wave of applause, a sound not of celebration for a downfall, but of affirmation for a reckoning. I raised my glass of sparkling water. "To family," I said, my voice clear and steady. "And to building something better on the ruins of the old." The laughter that followed was not cruel. It was the sound of release, of a long overdue correction, of a story finally finding its true and proper ending. The applause was a ghost in my ears as I let myself into my apartment later that night. The quiet felt different now, not the oppressive silence of loneliness, but the peaceful stillness of resolution. I slipped off my heels, the cool of the hardwood floor a welcome sensation against my tired feet. I poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle I'd been saving for a victory I'd never been sure would come, and sat on my sofa, the sapphire silk of my dress pooling around me. My phone was a frantic beacon of light on the coffee table, buzzing with texts and missed calls from half the people at the party. I silenced it. This moment was mine. I woke the next morning to the soft gray light of a port blossom dawn. There was no dread, no familiar weight in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I woke up with a sense of clarity, of purpose. A text from Alistair had arrived at 6 a.m. board meeting at 8 o'clock. "Your new office is ready. Welcome home, Alara." Walking back through the glass doors of Sterling and Finch was a surreal experience. The building was the same, the polished marble floors and faint scent of coffee and paper were unchanged, but the atmosphere had shifted. The security guard, Marcus, who had so grimly escorted me out, now nodded with a look of profound respect. The receptionist, whose name I'd shamefully never learned, looked up with a bright, genuine smile. "Good morning, Miss Vance." "Good morning, Sarah," I replied, reading her nameplate for the first time. "It's a beautiful day." Her smile grew. "Yes, ma'am. I think it is." The executive floor was humming with a nervous, electric energy. Colleagues I'd worked with for years offered quiet, sincere congratulations as I walked toward the main boardroom. Some looked relieved, others looked hopeful. A few looked terrified, no doubt wondering what my return signified for the old guard. Alistair was waiting for me, along with the other senior partners and several faces I recognized from the Crestwood board, including a composed Eleanor Crestwood. The mood was formal, but charged with an undercurrent of revolutionary zeal. "Alara," Alistair said, his voice warm with pride. "Welcome to your first board meeting." The titles and names blurred as he made the introductions, but what I registered was the look in their eyes. It wasn't pity or morbid curiosity. It was expectation. It was respect. "Before we begin," Alistair said, once we were all seated around the long mahogany table, "I want to state for the record that what happened was a catastrophic failure on our part. We failed to protect our own. We are here today not just to right that wrong, but to fundamentally reshape this firm so that it never happens again." He looked directly at me. "The board has unanimously voted to create and offer you a new position, Chief Operating Officer, with a controlling interest in all new projects and final authority on firm-wide policy." Chief Operating Officer. The words hung in the air, heavy and luminous. It wasn't just my old job back. It was a leap, a confirmation, a mandate. It was the kind of trust one had spent my entire life trying to earn. "What does that entail?" I asked, my voice steady. Eleanor Crestwood spoke up, her voice crisp and clear. "It entails a complete overhaul, dear. You have the authority and the backing to rebuild our culture from the foundation up. We're not just giving you a title. We're giving you the tools." An hour later, I stood before the door to my new office. A simple, elegant brass plate was already affixed to the dark wood, "Alara Vance, Chief Operating Officer." The office was a corner suite with panoramic views of the city and the sea, the blues and grays of Port Blossom stretching out before me. But it wasn't the view or the sprawling mahogany desk that took my breath away. It was the emptiness. It was a blank slate. My first act was to call an all-hands meeting for that afternoon. The firm's largest conference room was filled to capacity, people lining the walls, their faces a mixture of curiosity, hope, and anxiety. I stood before them, not as a victim returned, but as a leader. "I know many of you are wondering what happens now," I began, my voice clear and calm. "So let me be direct. We are not here to punish. We are here to build." The silence that allowed corruption to fester ends today. I laid out my vision, a new, transparent process for promotions and project assignments. An independent ethics committee with elected representatives from every level of the firm. A mentorship program to ensure that young talent, especially women and minorities, was nurtured and protected. Regular, transparent pay equity audits. A building is only as strong as its foundation, I concluded. And from this day forward, the foundation of Sterling and Finch will be integrity. The questions that followed weren't fearful. They were engaged, thoughtful, and at times, brilliant. I wasn't just talking to employees. I was talking to partners in a new venture. My phone rang twice that afternoon. It was my father. I declined both calls and then, with a sense of quiet finality, I blocked his number. An email from Leo appeared in my inbox a short time later, a long, rambling screed of self-pity, blame, and half-hearted apologies. I deleted it without reading past the first line and created a filter to send any future correspondence from him directly to the trash. Some structures are not worth renovating. They are condemned, and you walk away to build on solid ground. I stayed late that night, long after the offices had emptied. The quiet was a comfort, the city lights a glittering promise outside my window. On the wide, empty surface of my new desk, I placed a single object, the framed photograph of my mother and me, our faces alight with the joy of a future that was just beginning. Her battle was different from mine, but she had fought it with a quiet, fierce grace. I remembered one of our last conversations when I was complaining about a professor who consistently ignored my ideas. "Don't ever let anyone convince you that your silence is a virtue, Alara," she had told me, her hand warm on mine. "Sometimes, the most elegant and powerful thing you can do is raise your voice." Looking out at the city I loved, the city I would now help to shape, I finally understood. My voice was my own, and I was just learning how to use it. The future, like the skyline before me, was a blueprint waiting to be drawn.